Sierra Vista! Hey, what a wonderful crowd! This is wonderful. And all you people that found the shade, God bless you. That's great. Thank you so much for coming out today. We got a very special concert for you today. Why are we doing that? Because it was you, the audience, that came up with many ideas and says, we'd like to hear more marches in your concerts. So we listened to you, and we thought, what better way to satisfy this quest for more marches than having an all John Philip Sousa concert. And then we wanted to raise the bar and said, why not we have this John Philip Sousa concert and have it narrated and hosted and emceed to tell you all these wonderful stories, then have Mr. John Philip Sousa IV narrate and MC our concert. Woo! I tell ya, it doesn't get better than that. So, I got a couple of announcements that I just want to share with you before we get going on concert. Is that afterwards, Mr. Sousa is going to be available to meet with the audience members. You might have noticed we've had a table up here with some books that he's offered for sale. Don't worry about that. I was hoping to have an ice cream truck, but I guess that's not going to happen, so that would have been a really nice treat. This concert is made possible by all the generous donations that you have shared with us over our concert seasons and performances, and we would invite you to help us out again to make sure we can do more of these types of concerts. We have, let's see, I was looking around. I was looking for concerts. We got Mr. Sousa. So why don't we get this concert rolling? So the Sierra Vista Community Band, under the direction of Emily Godwin, would like to introduce our John Philip Sousa concert, hosted by Mr. John Philip Sousa IV. Good afternoon.
Oh, the on-off button. Okay. I'm not up to date on technology. Good afternoon and welcome to a concert that you won't soon forget. I say that because most Sousa concerts are a rich mixture of pieces that Sousa wrote as well as pieces of other composers. Sousa would play another composer's music and then would play one of his own pieces as an encore, and then someone else's music followed by a Sousa encore, and so on and so forth. Our concert this afternoon is a very unique concert in that it is 100% John Philip Sousa music. The main reason this is a unique concert is that the Sousa music is complex and most of it is pretty hard to play. As a result, most bands follow the traditional Sousa concert format. In all my time of doing these, I've only had the good fortune to be part of one other all-Sousa concert. I'm thrilled to be part of this one by your own Sierra Vista Community Band, and I thank you. Now, I must tell you that I'm not the first Sousa to take the stage in the beautiful state of Arizona. My great-grandfather performed 17 concerts here from 1902 to 1928 in Phoenix, Tucson, Douglas, Yuma, and Prescott. He loved the Old West. So what do we know about John Philip Sousa? An American composer? Sure. Husband to his beautiful wife, Jane. Father to his 3 children, Jane Priscilla, Helen, and John Philip Sousa Jr. John Philip Sousa, a good neighbor in Washington, D.C., and later in New York State. A United States Marine? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Beginning at age 13 as a musician's apprentice, following a brief stint in the band at the circus, playing his instrument, the violin. And then at age 24, the youngest director of the President's Own. John Philip Sousa, sportsman? Oh yes. A hunter, a world champion marksman. He loved baseball. In Sousa's band, if you just happened to be a decent shortstop, you stood a much better chance of making the grade in both Sousa's band and on Sousa band baseball team. A horseman? Absolutely. He actually broke his collarbone in a horse riding accident. Sousa and his wife Jane would actually ride from New York City down to North Carolina.
Wow.
And golf? Well, he said he really didn't have time for that. A successful businessman? A resounding yes, as he died a millionaire. But he learned the hard way. He sold the Washington Post March and other early pieces for $35 a piece.
Wow.
Was he prolific? Absolutely. In some dictionaries, if you look up the word prolific, you'll actually see a picture of Sousa. 137 marches, 17 comic operas, songs, suites, show tunes, articles, essays, 6 books, over 500 pieces in all. And Sousa had 3 major hits playing on Broadway, all at the same time. John Philip Sousa, an entertainer? No doubt. A superstar? I'll let you decide. America's first big superstar? Well, I think so. In 1900, he was best-known musician in the world. Just about every American, even those who couldn't name their own president, could tell you all about John Philip Sousa. People the world over whistled and sang and danced to the Washington Post. And then came the Liberty Bell and El Capitan, and of course, Stars and Stripes Forever. For 50 years, words like Sousa and Sousa's band were ways of describing the biggest and the best and the most spectacular. He was a king. He was, after all, the March King. Sousa took a 65-piece band with its female harpist and lovely opera singers to almost every tank town in America. Wherever the railroad went, Sousa's band went. When the train pulled into town, usually early or mid-morning, the huge crowds were waiting at the station along with the town's high school band or community band. And Sousa would get off the train and conduct the band right there at the station. The schools were closed so kids could attend the matinee, and later that evening the town's adults would flock to the concert and hang on every musical note from Sousa and his band. Sousa's band was the first large musical organization to go on tour and to make it pay. 60,000 people a week came to see Sousa and enjoy culture as has never before been heard in their small town. Wagner was played by Sousa in Peoria 3 years before it was played in New York City. Sousa's philosophy of entertainment was simple. Give the people what they want, just make sure it's the very best. John Philip Sousa, an American ambassador. Oh yes. Sousa and his men were living examples of what they celebrated. They were the first native-born Americans to appear on the international concert stage, gaining the respect of serious musicians and composers, both here and in Europe. Sousa liked to suggest a native superiority of people born in a free democracy, unburdened by European traditions of cynicism and socialism. Sousa's band made 3 treks across the pond to perform in virtually every major European capital, and then took a 65-piece band with soloists and staff on an around-the-world tour. Was Sousa an American patriot? There can be no doubt. One newspaper, in attempting to put a label or title on John Philip Sousa, labeled him the Pied Piper of patriotism, and how perfectly fitting that was. Leader of the President's Own, serving 5 presidents. His music, Liberty Bell, America First, Black Horse Troops, Bullets and Bayonets, The Gallant Seven, The Glory of the Yankee Navy, Hail to the Spirit of Liberty, The Invincible Eagle, and of course Stars and Stripes Forever. At age 61, John Philip Sousa joined the United States Navy as lieutenant commander to raise money for the World War I effort. And upon joining the Navy, Sousa said, "I joined the reserves on the last day of May. I gave up my band and $1,000 a day. $1 a month is my government pay. My God, how the money rolls in." Sousa raised millions for the war effort, giving concerts around the country with the Great Lakes Naval Band. Now, for those of you who don't know, When Sousa was director of the President's Own, he was an enlisted man, but he always thought that the position warranted an officer's commission. The Marines disagreed, and that was one of the reasons that Sousa eventually left the President's Own and started his own band. When he volunteered to join the Navy to raise money for the war effort, he was absolutely delighted and so very proud that they made him an officer. In fact, Sousa is buried in his naval uniform. The story of Sousa and his band is a story of America during the years leading up to World War I and into the 1920s. Sousa's tunes and rhythms marched America out of the 19th century and into a bigger, faster, and much more complex world. In fact, Sousa learned early in his career that success would be based on publicity as well as music and talent. He hired the best press agents, creating his own public image and then living them to the fullest. The New York Times would run a story if Sousa came down with the flu, and when he shaved his beard, it was headlines in the Washington Tribune. Everybody in America knew Sousa, and yet nobody really knew Sousa. In his own time, he disappeared into a myth of his own making. If you knew Sousa, if you really want to know Sousa, then listen to his music again, and let the melodies and rhythms sing their way into your heart, help solve the mystery that surrounds this man the newspapers called the Pied Piper of patriotism. Now, my great-grandfather used to say, a speech should be like a modern-day lady's dress. Short enough to be of interest, but long enough to cover the subject. So with those wise words in mind, let's get on with why we are here today, to listen to and enjoy some incredible music by your very own and wonderful Sierra Community Band. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to dedicate this concert to all of our veterans and active duty members of the military. Thank you. And to those who serve as first responders, thank you. And not to be forgotten, our Border Patrol agents who are having to fight the battle, looking in both directions. To all of you, our heartfelt thanks. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's get on with the show. Our first piece of Sousa music today is the Rifle Regiment, a march dedicated to the officers and men of the 3rd U.S. Infantry Division. Although different from most of his other marches, many consider this one to be one of his best pieces. So, ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy Sousa's Rifle Regiment. Our next piece is actually a compilation of 3 different treatments of that wonderful toe-tapping Yankee Doodle as done by John Philip Sousa. The first is a fanfare, a fife and drum simulation taken from his music from an 1898 patriotic stage show. The second is the trooping of the colors from the Salute to the Nations of the Columbia Exposition in 1893. And the third is a collection from the national patriotic and typical airs of all lands written by Sousa for his Marine band. Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy. The Thunderer was composed by John Philip Sousa in 1889. The origin of the name is not officially known, though it is speculated it gets its name from the pyrotechnic effects of the drum and bugle in the score. The march was the composition that Mrs. Sousa thought to be his very best and remains one of his most famous. It was used as the theme for ABC News from 1968 to 1972, and the song was used in a Columbo episode, Make Me a Perfect Murder. Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy The Thunderer.
Julia, stay here.
Our next piece was written in honor of the Boston Retail Grocers Association, which sponsored an annual food fair and music jubilee. Sousa and his band were usually the main musical attraction at this event. One year, my great-grandfather noticed a very attractive young lady who was at one of the center of attraction at one of the venues at the Jubilee. And Sousa promised himself that one day he would compose a piece in honor of this young lady, who, by the way, he never met. The piece became known as the Fairest of the Fair. So please enjoy. And by the way, there's no additional charge today for watching our dancers. I mentioned earlier that this is an all Sousa concert. And our next piece shows the diversity that Sousa had in writing music. This afternoon, we're going to hear one of his short, syncopated compositions called With Pleasure, which was also performed under the title Dance Hilarious. Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy. In 1889, the owners of a young and not very well-known newspaper asked Sousa to write a march in honor of an essay contest the newspaper was sponsoring. Sousa gladly agreed, and later that year, on the grounds of the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C., Sousa and his band played our next Sousa march, the Washington Post, for the very first time. The tune was soon adapted to the new and very popular dance, the two-step. and shortly became the #1 piece of music in America and all through the world. It is the march that is credited with making the newspaper an overnight success, and the march that made Sousa a household name. You might be interested to know it is one of those marches that Sousa sold for $35. Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy my favorite John Philip Sousa march, the Washington Post. I'm going to give the band a little break here and tell you a couple of stories about what it's like being related to John Philip Sousa. But first, let's hear it from Melanie and this incredible band. I was checking out of a grocery store not too terribly long ago and didn't have a lot of cash with me, and I prefer not to use a credit card for groceries, so I wrote a check. And I handed the check to the young lady who was the cashier, and she looked at the check, and she looked at me, and she looked at the check, and she looked at me, and she looked at the check, and looked at me, and she goes, "John Philip Sousa?" Yeah. She goes, "What's it like being related to such a great baseball player?" I told her I got free tickets to the game. So as I'm sure a lot of you know, in Washington, D.C., there are any number, I don't know how many, 6, 7, 8 bridges that link Virginia to Washington, D.C. And one of those bridges happens to be the John Philip Sousa Bridge. About 6 or 7 years ago, I had the great honor of being the master of ceremonies at the Great American Brass Band Festival in Danbury, Kentucky. And it's a wonderful event, just 3 days of great music. And the festival one afternoon asked me to it's on a college campus, and so they asked me to sit on kind of the side of the road, and they put up a tent with sign with my name and meet with folks and autograph books and whatever people wanted autographed. And I said, sure, I'd love to do it. So I'm sitting, I've got a table in front of me, and there's a fairly long line of people waiting to say hello. And out of the corner of my eye, I'm not sure why, but I spotted this woman who seemed to be headed in our direction, and I kept talking with the people in front of me, and I looked up, and the woman was getting considerably closer, and the next thing I know, she has jumped in the front of the line, kind of nudged the person who I was talking to out of the way, and she goes, "Your name John Philip Sousa?" I go, "Yeah, I'm the fourth." She goes, "You got a bridge in Washington, D.C.? I said, "Well, it's not exactly my bridge." She goes, "Well, the traffic sucks and you have to fix it." And with that, she turned around and walked away. What are you going to do, right? And I've got some pull in Washington, D.C., but nothing that could get the traffic fixed. I did a concert with the Allentown Band many years ago, and the director, a wonderful gentleman by the name of Ron Dimke, told me before the concert that there was a lady whose grandfather had played in Sousa's band, and that it really was the highlight of her family. And would I take the time during intermission and meet with the lady? And I said, of course I would, be happy to. And I'm always interested in meeting people who have had relatives that have played in Sousa's band or whatever. So during intermission, I go out, and very elegant woman dressed to the nines and beautiful gray hair, and we chatted for a few minutes, and she told me about her father playing in Sousa's band, and she said, "Can I introduce you to my sons?" And I said, "Sure, I'd love to meet your sons." So she introduced me to her eldest son. His name was John, and very, very nice, handsome young man. And she introduced me to her middle son, whose name was Philip. And then she introduced me to her youngest son, whose first name was Sousa. You can't make this stuff up, right? And it was such a big deal, her father being in Sousa's band, that she named her kids John and Philip and Sousa. I told the youngest son if he wanted to change his name, it was perfectly fine with me. All right, let's get back to why you're here. Sousa was always concerned for the welfare of his musicians. As director of the Marine Band, he secured outside engagements for the band to help supplement their meager government salaries. One of the most popular of these engagements was playing on the Potomac steamer William S. Corcoran on its journeys between Washington, D.C. and Quantico, Virginia. Not only was the view and wonderful music by Sousa and his Marine musicians a delight to the passengers, but the cool breezes of the Potomac River were a relief from the notorious humidity in the summer in Washington, D.C. One night, the Marine Band sang the Marines' hymn to their beloved bandmaster while returning from one of these excursions. Following the cruise and the serenade by his band, Sousa went home and wrote the piece that he, and many others, consider his very finest march, taking the Marine motto, always faithful. Ladies and gentlemen, Semper Fidelis. One of the many songs, written by John Philip Sousa, I've Made Plans for the Summer, is a maiden's reply to a proposal for marriage. Our main character in this piece, a young lady, is dreaming of a wonderful summer in Coney Island, shooting the chutes and listening to the bands, but tells her suitor, who had just proposed, that she might consider his proposal at the end of the summer. I don't know about you, but I think maybe this guy has some problems. Anyway, please enjoy I've Made Plans for the Summer. At a concert in York, Pennsylvania, a civic committee requested that Sousa write a march to be used in the annual York Flower Festival commemorating White Rose Day. The white rose is the emblem of the House of York in England, from which York, Pennsylvania took its name. This march never became terribly popular, as the flower festival was canceled due to World War I. Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy. The King Cotton March is a military march composed in 1895 by John Philip Sousa for the Cotton States and International Exposition the same year. The expression King Cotton in general referred to the historically high importance of cotton as a cash crop in the southern part of the United States. The tune is often included in Sousa concerts due to its ongoing and lasting popularity. It was included in the musical soundtrack as the carousel music in the 1973 film The Sting, as well as featured in the film Adventures of Milo and Otis as background music. Additionally, it was featured in Emmanuel Goes to Dinosaur Land, an episode of the television show 30 Rock. Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy King Cotton. How about one more? Okay, you asked nicely. Someone once asked John Philip Sousa who or what influenced him to compose his most famous of all marches. And before the question was hardly asked, Sousa said, God, and I say that with all reverence. In recounting how he came to compose this march, Sousa, in his autobiography, Marching Along, had this to say: "Here came the most vivid of incidents of my career. While on holiday in Italy, I learned of the death of my manager and friend, David Blakely, in New York. I immediately booked passage on the next ship home. As the steamer sailed out of the harbor, I was pacing the deck, absorbed in the thoughts of the many duties and decisions that awaited me in New York. Suddenly, I began to hear the rhythmic beat of a band playing within my brain. It kept on ceaselessly playing and playing. Throughout that entire tense voyage, that imaginary band continued echoing and re-echoing the most distinct melody. I did not transfer a single note while on the ship, but when we returned to New York, I sat down the measures my imaginary rain band had been playing, and not a single note has ever changed. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the march that Ronald Reagan signed into law as our national march of the United States of America, the composition known the world over, the Stars and Stripes Forever.
committee man, Sierra Vista Zone? Thank you so very much for coming now. If you'd like to meet Mr. John Philip Sousa, please come on up. He's going to be here to be able to talk to you, many stories there. We have some mementos, some books for him if you'd like to buy an autograph, that'd be wonderful. Again, we appreciate all your support. Anything that you can do to help, that would be wonderful. Thank you so very, very much. Have a wonderful, beautiful day.
Thank you. Awesome.